Welcome to the Hall of Fame edition of Baseball Weekend Journal. I'm your host, Paul Shivari. This week, I'll talk about Ken Griffey Jr. and Mike Piazza receiving Hall of Fame honors and elaborating on their careers. I'll also analyze the voting results and whether or not others should have joined Griffey and Piazza, and whether Alan Trammell or Mark McGwire still have hope for a nod from the Veterans Committee. The Hot Stove League continues to boil as Justin Upton, Yoenis Cespedes, Howie Kendrick, and many other bigger names still remain unsigned. Ben Revere and Drew Storen got swapped, plus more, on this week's edition of Baseball Weekend Journal. Last Wednesday, the Baseball Writers Association of America revealed their final totals for the 2016 Hall of Fame vote. This year, they decided to induct Ken Griffey Jr. and Mike Piazza. While Griffey was a no-brainer to be a first-ballot selection, the writers surprised some, including myself, with the selection of Piazza. Jeff Bagwell just missed the cut by about 20 votes, and Tim Raines needed a little more than 25 votes to make it to Cooperstown on his second-to-last try. Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds picked up their numbers this year, but only received a little under half of the amount needed for induction. It will take time for the bad taste of the steroid era to leave our collective mouths, but when it is all said and done, I expect that certain players with a reputation of steroids hanging over their heads to get into the Hall. Bonds, Clemens, and Alex Rodriguez will more than likely gain entry based on the way the votes have been trending. Another example as to why I think rumored steroid users will be eventually forgiven in the eyes of the writers is this year's announcement of Mike Piazza as a Hall of Famer. Piazza has had allegations of steroid use lingering over him since his playing days. He spent a good majority of his career playing in a time when testing was not being enforced by the league. I'm not suggesting that he actually did do steroids, but I do wonder why somebody like Piazza, who hasn't had to testify in court about steroids and who hasn't tested positive for steroids, isn't treated the same as other players who haven't either. This includes Sammy Sosa. Sosa put up bigger power numbers offensively and was probably a flashier outfielder compared to Piazza behind the plate. Catchers sometimes get treated differently than other position players because of the amount of work it takes to be a successful catcher at the major league level. Perhaps that is why Piazza got in and Sosa is still on the outside. As for Clemens and Bonds, they have never been proven to have done steroids other than the visual tests and allegations from those close to them. They put up some of the best numbers the game has ever seen, and if we consider that the league was filled with multiple steroid users during their playing careers, it should still be recognized that they were a couple of the best players around. The next 6 years' worth of Hall of Fame voting will be one to watch to see if Bonds and Clemens make it in. Instead of jabbering on about the steroid era, let's look at the careers of this year's Hall of Fame class. First up, Ken Griffey Jr. Griffey, the son of Big Red Machine All-Star Ken Griffey Sr., is the first ever #1 overall draft pick to make it into the Hall of Fame, and he received the highest percentage of votes as he was only 3 votes shy of being the first unanimous selection. Known for his smooth and sweet left-handed swing, Griffey also was one who could flash the leather. When he wasn't making leaping catches at the wall of Seattle's Kingdome and risking his body to kill off opponents' rallies, Griffey would be crushing the ball out of the park. More than half of his nearly 1,200 extra base hits were home runs. He put up 630 home runs in 22 seasons, which is currently good for 6th all-time. Griffey and his father are also the only father-son duo to hit back-to-back home runs in a game, doing so at Anaheim Stadium in 1990 off of Kirk McCaskill. Griffey finished with a lifetime batting average of .284 and an OPS of .907. He will go into Cooperstown as a member of the Seattle Mariners, the team that drafted him and where he spent 13 of his 22 seasons, including the very beginning and end of his career. He was also a member of the Cincinnati Reds for 9 years and the Chicago White Sox for half of the 2008 season. Griffey never made it to the World Series, and the furthest he ever made it into the playoffs was the 1995 American League Championship Series. He will probably go down as the best player in Major League Baseball to never win or play in a World Series, which is sad for a player that was so incredible and fun to watch and who was so deserving of playing on that stage. Mike Piazza was drafted in the 62nd round of the 1988 amateur draft by the Los Angeles Dodgers. The 1,390th pick went on to make his debut in 1992 with LA and would play for 16 seasons, making over 1,600 starts at catcher. His 396 home runs playing at catcher surpassed fellow Hall of Famer Carlton Fisk for the most all-time hit by a backstop. Piazza's father was the childhood friend of longtime Dodgers manager Tommy Lasorda. This relationship afforded Mike the opportunity to be drafted by the Dodgers, a favor Mike's father asked of Tommy Lasorda, and the opportunity to meet Hall of Famer and arguably the greatest hitter of all time, Ted Williams. When Mike was a teenager, Lasorda and Williams went to visit the Piazza family and to watch Mike take batting practice in the batting cage in his backyard. Ted Williams would go on to tell the young future Hall of Famer, "Don't let anyone ever mess with your swing." Mike Piazza must have taken this advice seriously, because he became one of the most feared hitters of his era. He finished with 427 home runs and a lifetime batting average of .308. Not bad for a guy who was nearly last in his draft. Piazza will be joining the Hall of Fame as a member of the New York Mets, where he spent most of his playing career. Piazza joins Tom Seaver as the only Hall of Famers to represent the Mets on their Cooperstown plaques. Piazza had brief stints with the San Diego Padres and the Oakland Athletics, and a really brief stint in 1998 with the Florida Marlins, who traded him to the Mets after only 2 weeks of receiving him via trade from the Dodgers. Piazza would go on to play in one World Series with the Mets in 2000, hitting 2 home runs in that series but never winning the championship. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Jeff Bagwell and Tim Raines missed joining Griffey and Piazza in this year's Hall of Fame class. In my mind, it is no doubt that Jeff Bagwell will be in the Hall of Fame eventually. Tim Raines, on the other hand, while totally deserving of the honor, will need a boost from the voters next year on his final year on the ballot. I don't have confidence in the BBWAA to make this happen, but I do have confidence that the Veterans Committee would rectify that oversight by voting for him. One positive sign for Raines is that Alan Trammell, on his final year on the ballot, received 36 more votes than last year in what I assume was one final push from the writers. Alan Trammell and Mark McGwire didn't get in on their final years on the ballot. I think Alan Trammell may have a shot getting in down the road from the Veterans Committee. He is a well-liked player amongst his peers. He has the numbers to back up his performance on the field. Unfortunately for Trammell, his double-play counterpart in Detroit, Lou Whitaker, was quickly off the ballot after his first year, failing to clear the 5% threshold in an oversight that may or may not have indirectly affected the writers' view of Trammell. I don't see Mark McGwire making it into the Hall of Fame, despite his record-breaking home run season in 1998 and the high home run totals he put up in his career. He has too low of a batting average and a lack of hits to justify placing him. Even if Barry Bonds gets in, McGwire doesn't have enough accolades to back up his career. Looking ahead to next year's potential Hall of Fame ballot, there are some interesting names that will appear for the first time. The biggest 3 being Ivan Rodriguez, Manny Ramirez, and Vladimir Guerrero. 5-time World Series champion catcher Jorge Posada will be amongst them too. While I don't see any of those players making it in on the first ballot, I do see the addition of so many big names making it harder for the remaining players to get more votes. If I were to handicap next year's vote right now, I would say that Jeff Bagwell and Tim Raines make it in. Lee Smith misses on his final year by more than 20%, and Trevor Hoffman will get really close, but will just miss, and Curt Schilling will get within 10%. I also expect to see Tim Wakefield get at least 1 vote, maybe as many as 3. Stay tuned. Last week didn't see any of the bigger name free agents finding their final landing spots for 2016. Justin Upton is rumored to be looking for a 1-year deal to prove his worth, though it remains unclear which team will sign him. His agent, Larry Reynolds, insists that Upton wants a long-term deal, but has only received short-term, low-money offers from the White Sox and the Angels. Now that Denard Span has signed with the San Francisco Giants and Alex Gordon has decided to return to Kansas City for 4 more years, Upton remains one of the bigger name free agent outfielders available. I cannot predict where he may end up, but if you ask me to, I would say it might be a team you weren't expecting, such as Baltimore, Detroit, or Philadelphia, if they were willing to commit the money. The Blue Jays might have an opening now that Ben Revere has been traded to the Nationals, but there is also good reason to believe that switch hitter youngster Dalton Pompey will get more playing time in place of Revere. The Washington Nationals, who were loaded at the back end of their bullpen after trading for Jonathan Papelbon last season, did the right thing by getting rid of Drew Storen. While I personally would have liked to keep Storen as the closer, moving Papelbon's $11 million contract would have been tough. If the Nationals were to have a down year heading into the July trade deadline, I would expect them to eat some of Papelbon's contract and dangle him on the open market for teams that need a closer down the stretch. However, with the hiring of Dusty Baker as manager, order should be restored to the Nationals' locker room, leading to success on the field that was missing in 2015 that needed to be built upon following 2014's NL East championship season. The Nationals are an early favorite to win the National League behind solid pitching of Max Scherzer and the hopes of a repeated success from the reigning league MVP Bryce Harper. Tidbits before I end this week's show. The Angels and White Sox continue to be pursuing big-name outfielders, but they may be trying to pull off trades to bring in players that don't cost quite as much. Keep your eyes and ears on them in the next week to see if they can pull off a major multi-team trade or possibly ink Upton or Cespedes to a 3 or 4 year deal. St. Louis Cardinals former director of scouting Chris Correa pleaded guilty to 5 counts of unauthorized access to a protected computer. We'll now wait and see if the MLB commissioner Rob Manfred will levy any sort of punishment on the Cardinals in the way that we've seen the NFL punish the New England Patriots for tampering with footballs and stealing play signals with video cameras. And speaking of football, as I record this, the NFL playoffs are just underway. I'm calling it right now that the winner of the divisional round game, which could potentially feature the Seahawks and the Panthers, will yield this year's eventual Super Bowl champion. My gut says that Cam Newton and the Panthers defense find a way to ride the hot streak they've been experiencing all season, all the way to the victory in Super Bowl 50. You heard it here, folks. Panthers win the Super Bowl. Thank you so much for joining me on the second ever edition of Baseball Weekend Journal. I'm Paul Shivari. Follow the show on Twitter at Baseball Weekend. Find me on Facebook at facebook.com/baseballweekend. And if you would like to email the show and have me try to answer one of your questions, send it to baseballwj@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to Baseball Weekend Journal. I'll see you next week.